Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you're well. In this video we're going to be discussing that little caveat around why combining fat and carbs together is not a good idea. So maybe I phrased that wrong. I've always recommended against combining fat and carbohydrates together, but there was always a caveat. So don't get too excited that I'm going to say yes, time to add the carbs and fats together again, because I'm not. But I want to remind you first, before we kind of go into more detail, is that I do generally recommend against combining fat and carbs together, because this can cause the creation of lipopolysaccharides, which will increase inflammation and immune issues, which also then will increase weight gain, insulin resistance, and other health issues. And then combining fat and carbs together, especially saturated fats, that provides that prolonged insulin response that I've spoken about before, which encourages more insulin resistance, along with the research that shows when we combine saturated fats and carbs together, we can increase body fat. So I've spoken about this in depth on the podcast episode I did a couple of months ago. It was titled "Why We Don't Combine Fat and Carbs Together," I believe, or carbs and fat. It's something along those lines. It was only a few months ago. But in that, I also mentioned, and there's a blog post on my website, Jermaine'sModelHealth.com. There's a blog post there that goes through pretty much everything I say in the podcast about why we don't combine fat and carbs together. But there's also a section there at the bottom that says there is a little caveat that a little amount of monounsaturated fat is not a big deal for a couple of reasons, and I've always stressed that that's going to be preferably extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil is acceptable. Not avocados, avocado oil, just to get that clear, and typically up to 1 tablespoon. So kind of capping it at 1 tablespoon there. Apart from the benefits of extra virgin olive oil, which are immense, and avocado oil does have some great benefits too, like extra virgin olive oil, as many of us know, great for hair, skin, nails, also great for cardiovascular health, has anti-cancer properties. It has been connected to some studies around longevity and anti-aging, but that is there in the podcast and on the webs. So, moving on, what we see in the research, there was one study titled "Saturated Fatty Acids Synergize with Elevated Glucose Levels to Cause Pancreatic B-Cell Death." This study also came up with the term of combining fat and carbs together as glucolipotoxicity, which is a great name. I actually really like it. I don't know why I didn't think of it. Glucolipotoxicity. So you have your glucose, you have your lipos, which is your lipids, and then you've got your toxicity. So what it showed, and this study was in vitro but still very relevant, that combining saturated fats and carbs cause pancreatic cells to die. So this is not just relevant to pancreatic cells. For those of you in the know, the pancreas is very, very essential to the gut overall, your gut health. Your pancreas is essential there. Your pancreas, your liver, your gallbladder, the cystic duct, they're all intricately combined. So this also is relevant to all the other cells in your body, because the cells are all made up of the same tissue and internal molecules. It just so happens that this one study is just on the pancreatic cells, but I will be showing you another study shortly. So this one also tested then polyunsaturated fats with high glucose / carbs, which still caused damage to the cells, but not as much as the saturated fats. And then they also combined monounsaturated fats with the glucose, which is primarily what's in our extra virgin olive oil and our avocado oil, and they saw no damage or toxicity to the pancreatic cells at all. So there was another study on mice that I think you will find really interesting, and this one was titled "The Effects of a High Monounsaturated Fat Diet on Glucose, Carbs again, and Lipid Metabolisms in Normal and Diabetic Mice." So this is a great study, very easy to understand if you do want to take a look, even just the whole abstract. It just kind of gets straight to the point. But this one showed that after 1 week of feeding, and before I go on, I've always recommended excuse me, that the majority of your fats should come from monounsaturated fats. You can search in here in the forum and you'll see lists of monounsaturated fats. You can search in here and you'll see where I make recommendations around the amounts of fats people should have. But I've always said monounsaturated fats is where your primary focus should be when it comes to your fats in your diet. So back to this study on mice. It showed that after 1 week of feeding normal mice high monounsaturated fatty acid diet, they saw lower serum triglyceride levels. A lot of you asked me about triglycerides, and triglyceride is really important. More important than cholesterol in my opinion. But anyway, so they saw lower serum triglyceride levels and reduced hepatic triglyceride production in comparison to a regular diet. Before I go on, hepatic triglyceride production is the production of triglycerides from the liver, what's going to contribute to fatty liver issues, cardiovascular issues, high cholesterol levels. I know this sounds contradictory to what I just said about cholesterol, but there's all different forms of cholesterol. So this is really interesting. They also saw that it suggested that the lowering of triglycerides consists of mechanisms including reduced hepatic triglyceride production. Well, yeah. When diabetic mice were fed the high monounsaturated fatty acid diet with a controlled caloric intake, the serum glucose levels lowered without an accompanying deterioration in lipid metabolism. So glucose was lowered with these monounsaturated fats, but that didn't also compromise fat breakdown or the metabolization or fat burning capacity of the cells in the body. So they didn't see deterioration in lipid metabolism, and the impaired glucose tolerance was ameliorated. Basically, it improved insulin resistance. So this study demonstrates that a high monounsaturated fatty acid diet can lower serum triglyceride levels in normal mice and improve disorders of glucose metabolism in diabetic mice. So monounsaturated fats, they can be protective when we consume them with carbs. They can help lower blood glucose response, and they can also help lower the amount of fat or triglycerides that your liver is producing. Like this is pretty important stuff. I'm just going to throw this in there because I think some of you will find this interesting. There was another study titled Substituting Dietary Fat with Polyunsaturated Fat Changes Abdominal Distribution and Improves Insulin Sensitivity. So before I go on, we have our saturated fats, then we have our polyunsaturated fats. Generally, I recommend against them unless they're coming from something like fish or our fish oils or our krill. And then we've got our monounsaturated fats. But what this study showed was improvements in insulin resistance and reduced abdominal fat. And as much as we've been told over the last few years that we should embrace saturated fat, obviously the keto movement was pretty big there, the research still shows us that we should still be cautious with saturated fat. And now I have spoken about, and I believe I shared a study in the Biohacking Library Facebook group maybe a week ago, that some people with certain genetic traits can be very sensitive to saturated fat, and it can cause inflammation in their body even without the combination of carbs or sugar. So this saturated fat in some people can be very inflammatory, and you're going to feel that with fatigue, energy lulls, cravings, aches and pains, stiffness in the body, even bowel issues, constipation. So, and then of course, like, you will struggle to lose fat if you're having this food, say, that's high in saturated fat, that's causing severe inflammation in your body. That's going to be an impact, not to mention the impact that will have on mental health, because yes, food does cause inflammation in your brain, which will impact your health, or mental and health overall. So I have spoken about that, and this is something to take into consideration. It's important for people to understand this. This doesn't mean that you go out and go crazy like listing off the monounsaturated fats. I like to keep it simple. You've got your extra virgin olive oil and your avocado oil. So you can cook with avocado oil. It has a high smoke point, but you can't cook with extra virgin olive oil. It's going to be a dressing or a condiment, which is great, because if you're going to have a salad with, say, quinoa or rice or sweet potato or something, you don't want a dry salad, unless you're like me and you just do lots of vinegars and mustards. You could totally do that, but otherwise extra virgin olive oil can go into that with your balsamic vinegar and just make it more enjoyable. And extra virgin olive oil does have a lot of benefits, including breaking down gallstones as well. I actually do really like extra virgin olive oil on my salads. I kind of flip-flop around what I do. And then most people are pretty good. I mean, you can still have saturated fats, but you just want to keep them on the lower end of the amount of fat you're having in a day. So maybe 15% of the amount of fat you're having in a day, maybe 20%. But here's one other thing that I want to mention. In regards to people who are sensitive to inflammation, who maybe notice that when they have saturated fat, they have more inflammation, and I've noticed that myself, that as well, for people who already have some sort of insulin resistance going on, maybe some new clients, maybe this, that, or the other. That can be one reason why someone will see slower results with body fat as well. Something like that can slow down results. So even if you were doing like a ketogenic diet, and I know some people that do their own form of a ketogenic diet where it's not necessarily high fat, but it's just lots of green vegetables and proteins and a little bit of fat. If that little bit of fat is coming from saturated fat, then that can impede them from getting any results at all. So it's important to recognize. And then for others, even if they're only combining fat and carbs on refeed day, if most of those fats are coming from saturated fat on refeed day, that could slow down them seeing fat loss. But it also, like I mentioned, could be affecting their mental health and stuff, which is going to impact fat loss, because willpower, motivation, blah, blah, blah. So that's a bit of a bummer. I know it is a bit of a bummer, because you think of ice cream, pizza, stuff like that, that most of us love to enjoy on refeed day, and you still can. I'm just teaching you, you still can. But just, it's something to be aware of. And maybe kind of making a conscious choice that if this is you and you've noticed issues with fat loss, even if you're great during the week and then on refeed day you're having more saturated fats and you're noticing your weight loss is not moving the way you'd like, then maybe instead on a refeed day, if you want, let's say instead of having the pizza, maybe go for tacos and sweet potato fries, or tacos and fries instead, or a burger and fries instead. Or instead of maybe having a second cinnamon roll, just have one cinnamon roll. Or instead of the ice cream every weekend, maybe limit yourself to ice cream once a month or something like that. Like, you can find ways around. I'm not saying you absolutely can't have saturated fats and carbs on refeed day. I'm just trying to say this could be a thing for you. It's definitely something to put into consideration. As your teacher, there's only a couple of people that pop into my head that this might be a thing for them, but otherwise you would know yourself, and if you want to put it to me, you totally can, and I'll give you some feedback. But I hope you found this helpful. I hope it explains to you why I've always said at lunchtime, or whenever you're having, let's say, a salad, people will ask me, why can't I put some sort of extra virgin olive oil, or why is it okay to put extra virgin olive oil in my salad with, say, quinoa, but I can't put on cheese? I hope this gives you a better understanding there. So let me know if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your day.